All eyes are keenly trained on COP28 in Dubai to see whether the loss and damage fund that was announced last year in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in COP27 will be operationalized or not. The meetings in the run-up to COP28 summit suggest that some amount of progress has been made, but a statement in September by the COP28 President-designate Sultan Al-Jaber, who had suggested that innovative ways need to be found for the funding, suggests that this issue remains a vexed one. As to which richer country is going to pay how much to the loss and damage fund and which vulnerable country is going to receive how much of that funding. So what exactly is the loss and damage fund? It is a sort of a reparation package that the richer nations will provide to the vulnerable developing countries or the global south. This is because the richer nations, the developed world, has been a historical emitter of greenhouse gases, which have already resulted in climate damage. And the vulnerable nations are suffering even though their contribution to the greenhouse gases has been much lower in the past. This was only recognized in Paris in 2015. A demand that had been ongoing for several decades culminated with a recognition that loss and damage needs to be factored in. This formed the basis of the Loss and Damage Fund, but from there on, again, it took 7 years for this announcement to be made in Egypt last year. What is the COP now? The COP, or the Conference of Parties, is the highest decision-making body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which I will refer to as UNFCCC. The decisions at the COP are made by consensus, which essentially mean that no country objects to the decision. There is no way of punishing any country if it does not comply to the commitments it has made. The only tools available to member nations is naming and peer review. COP is largely divided into two broad segments. It is made up of 197 countries, divided broadly into the Annex 1 parties and the non-Annex parties. The Annex 1 parties are the richer, developed countries, the industrialized nations, which are historically responsible for emissions, under which also lie the Annex 2 countries, which have a greater obligation of financial assistance to the vulnerable countries, being the richer of these nations. As far as the non-Annex parties are concerned, they are all the other nations, the developing world or the global south. So why has it taken for the Loss and Damage Fund to be announced only after so many decades? First of all, countries like India and other countries, or rather organizations, the Intergovernmental Organization, for instance, of smaller island nations, were moderately powerful voices pushing, along with many other NGOs that too were working in the environment sector, for the Loss and Damage Fund. However, the richer countries were resisting it, and among these, let me make a mention of the United States. Why so? Because after the Paris 2015 agreement, what was seen was, for a moment, for a period of about 4 years, a lull in the conversation around the Loss and Damage Fund. This is because at the helm of affairs was in the US, President Donald Trump, who was termed a climate change denier. It is only in 2020 when Joe Biden, who was pitted against Donald Trump, had made promises on climate action, that the Loss and Damage Fund made its way back to the agenda of the UNFCCC. And finally, an announcement was made in Egypt last year. However, the fund is still to be operationalized, and all eyes, therefore, that is the reason, keenly trained at Dubai COP28. The message at the moment is clear. It's already too late, and right now, the richer nations really need to put their money where their mouth is.